Amen. Exodus chapter number 14. Verses 13 and 14 is a base passage in which I want to take a look at today. But it will expound or extend to other areas of this particular chapter, maybe another. So Exodus chapter number 14, verses 13 through 14, it reads like this. And Moses said unto the people, Fear ye not, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show to you today. For the Egyptians whom ye have seen today, ye shall see them again no more forever. Verse 14 says, The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. Can you just repeat after me, leaving your troubles?
Leaving your troubles.
Amen. So thank God for the song that was sung earlier. And we just bless God for what he has in store for us. Here in Exodus, we see that, and we know Exodus is the book in which it talks about leaving or going from something. And in this case, it was the Israelites that's leaving Egypt after 430 years of oppression. Now they're leaving Egypt. There in Egypt at one time, at one point, was a good place for Israel, because there was a man by the name of Joseph who had gone there, and he had gone there and ended up serving well there. And in serving well, he ended up being a help to the children of Israel. But it came to a point in there came a Pharaoh that did not know Joseph, nor the people of God. And then that's when things started going bad for the people of God, for Israel. So 430 years of oppression. And then it came to a point where the people just get tired. You get tired of oppression. You get tired of the troubles that you're going through. And there were some things that the people did, and God responded. And then it comes to this particular point where they're leaving Egypt. So verse 13 again says, And Moses said unto the people, Fear ye not, and stand still, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show to you today. For the Egyptians whom ye have seen today, ye shall see them again no more forever. The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. You know, when we look at Egypt, Egypt is looked at a place of trouble. Place of oppression, a place where people want to leave. Certainly Egypt today is not like that. Egypt today is a place where people can vacation, people can go and tour and all kinds of things, as is a lot of places. Which at one point were a place of trouble. What was a place of trouble? But here in this text in which we're reading, Egypt was a place of trouble for the Israelites. And the Israelites wanted to leave that place of trouble. Now, when it comes to trouble, we all been in a place of trouble. Place of trouble is whenever there's something that basically is not in your favor, something that you do not like, something you want to leave. That's some trouble. No one wants to be in that particular place. But Israel ended up there. And it's one thing about trouble. Don't you know whenever you try to leave trouble don't want you to leave? It's hard to get away. It seems like trouble will have their claws on you. Take it, for instance, some people that got in trouble with the law. And they probably will tell you it's hard to really separate yourself. It seems like trouble is always on their tracks. It's always following them. Everywhere they go, there's trouble. So we want to leave trouble, and somehow we got to get away from trouble. Israel has the way in leaving trouble for us on today, here in the book of Exodus. First of all, what Israel did, they cried out to the Lord. Don't you know, whenever we're in trouble, we cry out to somebody. And I know all the times, as we said before, and it's somewhat funny, whenever we find out that a child doesn't necessarily have to be 5 years old, a child can be up to 30, 40, 50 years old, right? And the child in trouble, they end up calling out for mama. Because they know mama's going to come. Whether it doesn't matter. But here, the children of Israel knew to call out to God. They cried out to God because they were in trouble. Because they were in the midst of a people that didn't care much about them at all. All they wanted Israel to do is to make that brick, make that stuff they needed to build, use them, use their backs, and everything else just to use them up. And don't you know you get tired of being used up? Get tired of being used. And you want to come out of that. Well, the children of Israel cried unto God. And God, as sure as He is, sent help for them. He was there to help. So all we have to do is cry out to the Lord whenever we need to leave the troubles that we have. Here in Exodus, and I want to just take a look right here. Throughout Exodus, as they were heading out, God sent Moses and Aaron there. Aaron was older than Moses, not a whole bunch older, but older than Moses. And at one point, Aaron was supposed to be the spokesperson because they said that Moses had a speech impediment. Right. And then he got to the point where they were in front of Pharaoh to do what all they need to do. And guess who ended up talking? Moses. And so so Aaron was at first was going to be the spokesperson, but it turns out Moses ended up doing the talking. And God can empower you to do whatever you need to do, regardless of what we feel as though our fears are. Because Moses the one came up with why he couldn't do something. So God used them, both of them, throughout, just to let Pharaoh know to let God's people go. And then, of course, every time what God did, He hardened Pharaoh's heart. So Pharaoh turned around and would not let them go. So then Egypt was full of plagues. And then after the last plague, Pharaoh ended up letting Israel go. Then once he let them go, then Israel made it all the way to a particular point right before the Red Sea. Now here's what God said. He could have let Israel leave Egypt through Philistine. But what God said is because they may see the wars and want to and then repent or change their mind and go back to Egypt. Once God brings us out of Egypt, He don't want us to go back. So therefore they had to go a different way. He was going to take them by way of the Red Sea. So we get to a particular point of the Red Sea. Now the Red Sea is in front of them, and behind them is Pharaoh. Thank you. Is Egypt. And now what they're going to do? Now they're going to start complaining to Moses of why did you bring us out of Egypt in order to bring us to this particular point. Let us look at chapter number 14 and look at verse number 1. I'm just going to walk down this with us. And it says, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speak unto the children of Israel that they turn in camp before Hiroth between Migdol and the sea over against Baal-zephon, before it shall encamp by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are entangled in the land, the wilderness hath shut them in. Basically, they have nowhere to go. And that's what trouble thinks sometimes, that, look, we've had you so long, you ain't got nowhere to go. And that sometimes that's what trouble do. It put it in our minds that ain't nowhere to go. You might as well stay right where you are. Because after all, you're used to this. And we've all had some pain before in our body. And over a while, over time, you get used to that pain. And you have a tendency of learning how to work with that pain. Mm-hmm. And then when you finally do go to the doctor would say something like, how could you have gone so long with this pain? Anyone else would have just immediately gone to the doctor. And that's what trouble does. We get so used to working with it, so used to dealing with it, we have a tendency of staying there longer than what we want. But that's what the devil does. He keeps you somewhere longer than you really want to be there. You know, if you think you want to dabble in something, the devil is going to keep you there longer than what you thought you were going to stay. He goes on and says in verse number 2, verse number 3 says, "For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are entangled in the land, and the wilderness has shut them in. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he shall follow after them. And I will be honored upon Pharaoh and upon all his hosts, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord." And they did so. So what God wanted them to do is to know that he is God. We remember during all the plagues in which that happened there in Egypt, when Moses did something and Pharaoh had his magicians to do the same thing. And of course, all those were just what do you call it? False. But what God does is true, is real. You know the snake that Moses threw his rod out there, or Aaron's rod out there, and it turned into a snake? And then magicians did theirs. They had several of their snakes out there. Guess whose snake won? Yeah, Moses won. That's right. That Aaron's rod, just as they say, it swallowed the rest of them up. You know, and all the other things that happen. So what the devil tries to do is just try to throw up other things that make it look real, but in actuality it's not. So that's why he tells here, Moses even tell the people, don't fear not. He goes on and says this right here in verse number 5. "And it was told the king of Egypt that the people fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and of his servants was turned against the people. And they said, Why have we done this? That we have let Israel go from serving us." You know something? Of course, they let them go, then they don't want to let them go and everything else. And then now all of a sudden they let them go this time. Then they say, why did we do this? You know, can you just imagine all the work that Egypt has to do on their own now? They got to clean their own houses now. They got to do all this other kind of stuff all to themselves. They got to do the work because they had servants. He goes on and says in verse 6, "And he made ready his chariot and took his people with him. And he took 600 chosen chariots and all the chariots of Egypt and captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And he pursued after the children of Israel, and the children of Israel went out with a high hand. But the Egyptians pursued after them all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh and his horsemen and his army, and overtook them encamping by the sea beside Pahath-Hiroth and before Baal-Zephon." And look at this right here in verse number 10. "And when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them, and they were sore or very afraid. And the children of Israel cried out unto the Lord. And they said unto Moses, Because there were no graves in Egypt," this is their complaint to Moses, "because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness?" You know, the way in which we think sometimes when trouble just right on our tracks. Once we thought we got out of the issues of life, out of the things in which that were holding us down. And then other obstacles come up. And then we think that we might as well stay where we were. "Wherefore hast thou dealt thus with us, to carry us forth out of Egypt? Is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, Let us alone, leave us alone"? Remember when he came there with this dream of leaving Egypt and going to the land to serve God? God and Moses telling them that I am sent me. The God of their fathers. And then he goes on and says that we may serve the Egyptians, for it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. So this is not the first time that the Israelites began to think what was better for them. They began to think what was better for them. After they get into the wilderness, eventually they're going to get there. Then they're going to, because they don't have any food or they're hungry or they're tired or something, they're going to think about what they had there in Egypt. Yeah. He goes on and says this right here in verse number 13. "And Moses said unto them, unto the people, Look, fear ye not. Not only does he tell them to fear not, but he also says, stand still. Okay, chill out basically. And then he says, and see the salvation of the Lord. See the deliverance of the Lord. And what happens is that because we've been in trouble or been in our situations for so long, and finally when we step outside of it, and then we think because there are still obstacles, then we just don't see the deliverance at all. It says, I'm still in this stuff. But in all actuality, what God has done, he's rescued us because we cried out to him. We asked him to rescue us. And here he is sending help, sending aid, but to us it's not fast enough. It's not the way in which we think it should go. And like that, so we begin to reflect back onto the stuff in which we knew about. We knew about the world. We knew about all the other kind of stuff. We knew how to handle it. Mm-hmm. But now we're going into something totally different, and we don't know anything about it, and things don't look too good. That's when sometimes we have a tendency of just counting God short. We end up just going back to whatever we came from because of the fact that things are not working out the way in which I thought it was going to work out. It happens to all of us. Because things ain't working out the way in which we thought it should. I mean, it's because of the fact our human part of us, this old man part of us begin to try to bring up stuff that we think that the way in which stuff should be or should have been, and because of this, therefore, but we're not looking through the eyes of God. We're still looking through the eyes of man right now. Whenever we think is that we might as well stay back where we were before, continue to do what we were doing before. Why did we change? We didn't need to change. No reason to change. Leave well enough alone. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But God said, well, now it has changed, and now that is different, it ain't working like it used to work. It ain't getting no better. So we start reflecting back in everything. But don't you know when God has you to go in a certain direction, he's telling you don't look back. We got to continue to look where the direction in which God is telling you to go. So we can't hold on to what's behind us and try to go forward. Because when we do that, what we're doing, we're pulling the same old thing with us. We need to do what? Let it go. If we want to get out of the troubles and we want to leave troubles, we got to let it go. Amen. We ask God. God answers. He sends the direction. He sends the way. We start traveling that way. And things are so bumpy. Don't look good. But like Moses said, fear not. Just stand still. Then it says, see the salvation of the Lord. When are we going to see the salvation of the Lord, Moses? Moses said, today. That's what he says right there. He says, which he will show you today. For the Egyptians whom ye have seen today, ye shall see them again no more forever. When things are so much on us, those issues of whatever we have come out of or whatever we're trying to get out of, it seems like they're always on us. They won't get away. It's always just sticking around. But he says, just hold on. And God is going to look at verse number 14. He says, for the Lord shall fight for you. Here's what he's saying. I am the self-existent one, he says, will fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. So if we're going to leave our troubles, if we want to leave it, then in order for us to leave it, we got to not fear what God or where God is taking us to. Then we got to stand still. And we just not only that, but also see the salvation of the Lord, or see his deliverance. All we got to do is just remain steadfast, don't give up, don't throw in the towel, and he'll take us on through. It says, and the Lord said unto Moses, why are you crying? What's all this? Speak unto the children of Israel, but that they go forward. Now he tells Moses what to do. Don't give up, he says. Don't give up. He says, lift up the rod and stretch out thine hand over the sea and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. So God is not leaving us alone. God has not taken his hands off of us. Individually, collectively, or anything. I know things look kind of shoddy sometimes, but the thing is that God has not given up. God has given his direction. God says stick to the plan and don't, amen, give up. See the salvation of the Lord.
Amen.
Moses just has to continue to do what God is telling him to do. He said, lift up that rod, amen, separate the waters or divide it so the children of Israel can go across on dry ground through the midst of the sea. He didn't say nothing about the water being at least maybe two feet high. He said dry ground, meaning that's what it was. He says in 17, and I behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them. And I will get me honor or glory upon Pharaoh, and upon all his hosts, upon his chariots, upon his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. It's important for people to know who God is.
Amen.
It's important for people to know. If people don't know, God is going to make sure that they learn.
Amen.
It says, when I have gotten me honor upon Pharaoh, upon his chariots, and upon his horsemen, and the angel of God, which went before the camp of Israel, removed, pay attention to 19, it says, removed and went where? Behind them. So where he was leading them before, now all of a sudden he left that position and went behind them. So if this is the Red Sea, right in these aisles, you got one side over there, one side over here. Now they're on dry ground. Why? The angel of the Lord is leading them. Now he left before them and went behind them. And now that he's behind them, what he's doing, he's separating trouble from them. And that's what happens is that if we want to leave something, we got to know that God, amen, will be on our side. He goes before us, he stands beside us, and he also is behind us. He's our rear guard. That's what God is to us. When we call on him, he answers. The Bible lets us know that. He says, ask and you shall receive. Whatever we're asking and everything like that, if it's in the will of the Lord. If we want to separate ourselves from these issues that we go through sometime, amen, he's right there in order to do that. He says, and the pillar of the cloud went from before their face and stood behind them. Look at 20. And it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. And it was a cloud of darkness to them, talking about the Egyptians, but it gave light by night to these, talking about the Israelites, so that the one came not near the other all the night. Meaning that whatever long it took all night to cross the Red Sea on dry ground, then the angel of God was between, amen, Israel and between, amen, the camp of the Egyptians. And they could not come near them. That's what happens. Look, other people see the trouble around you, and you don't see it. And you don't see it. Why? Because God is keeping you. God is guarding you. God is leading you by the way. As long as we continue to follow what he says. He says, and Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued, went in after them to the midst of the sea, even all Pharaoh's horses and his chariots and his horsemen. And it came to pass that in the morning watch, the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariots' wheels. Y'all see what's happening now? They're following them. They're on dry ground too. They're really chasing them and everything like that. And took off their chariot wheels, that they drove them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel. Look right here. They now acknowledge and understand, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. What happens is that as the Egyptians were coming through on their chariots and everything, and their chariots were state of the art. The wheels metal and the metalworks and stuff like that, and the chariot was just like that, and 2 horses leading and 2 men on it. One is whatever you call it, with a bow and arrow. Was that Archer? Yeah, Archer. The other one was driving. They were just going. You know, we've seen those movies like Ben-Hur and stuff, you know? Yeah, just going. But what happened is that all this stuff going through that dry land, all it needs is a little bit of water down there, and that chariot ain't going nowhere. It's going to get stuck. So the wheels end up getting stuck. The wheels of the chariot end up getting stuck at the bottom of the sea. Why? Because God allowed them to come on in. And so whenever those things, and trouble, like I said, can be anything that we need to get out of, tries to come after us. Because it don't want us to go. Don't want us to leave. And it's the number of the devil. He wants to keep us on his side. And when we try to leave, whatever those issues are and stuff like that, he try to get back at you. But God is there for you. Don't forget. He says this right here. He says in verse number 25, once again, he took off their chariot wheels, they drove them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. And the Lord said unto Moses, stretch out thine hand over the sea, that the waters may come again upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots and upon their horsemen. Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to his strength when the morning appeared, and the Egyptians fled against it. And the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. The waters returned, covered the chariots and the horsemen and all the hosts of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. There remained not so much as one of them. But the children of Israel walked upon dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall unto them on the right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore, and Israel saw that great work which the Lord did upon the Egyptians, and the people feared the Lord. They feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. You know, it takes time, it takes some effort, it takes all this in order for us to have some fear of the Lord. For some reason, the fear of the Lord have a tendency of escaping us. I wonder why. How? So easily. Because the fear of the Lord is that dutiful respect and reverence, and that mostly comes from what he has done for us. After we recognize all that God has done for us individually. And when we look at it individually and we sing those nice pretty songs, about counting our many blessings, and then we see what God has done for us, and we can name them all one by one. And if we were to actually do that and recognize that it was God who gave us the blessings and delivered us from whatever issues they may have had, and he's keeping us, then that fear, that reverence should remain and be stronger than ever. So I don't get why we don't have or we don't keep that reverence for God. when we can break into a church with no problem, and when we can steal funds from the church with no problem, when we can do all this stuff of a place that's here to give God glory. Where's the fear? Where's the reverence? Where's the respect? And you will wonder about that, and that's why those people that don't have it are still in trouble, are still deeply mired in the trouble. And they say that they want to come out of it, but they can't because they just don't want to let go. And those of us who separate ourselves from that, God is our rear guard. He's keeping us from that, from going back. Because he reminds us day in and day out of the many blessings that he has given us. That left on our own, we will be right back. But because of God and what he has done for us. Well, Israel is no different. They make it to the wilderness, and as they travel, they still got some issues. They still have their own wants. More than what God has for them. That's what they want. They want more. And then they begin to think about, there we go again, think about Egypt. Didn't they just see Egypt floating in the sea? God has already rescued them. God has already delivered them. But yet still thinking about those troubles. Still thinking about where they came from. And that's what happens sometimes, that we begin to think about, you remember way back when. But all this stuff is gone, and the people are different. You're different. Situation has changed. And it ain't going to be the same. All we have is what we have right now, and what God has in store for us and before us. So here, leaving troubles, how do we do that? We can only do it through the help of God. First of all, we cry out to him, just as Israel did. We cry out to him, and we talk about crying out, we're talking about, we just said, we're tired, we're done, we just want to get out of this. And then God sends help. He sends a deliverance. Not only does he send it, he actually does it himself. He delivers us out of whatever issues that we find ourselves in. Once he delivers us out of that, we look back and still look at those troubles and stuff like we miss it or something. And then we just want to dabble in it all over again. But we need to stay out of it, because we go back into it, just be worse off than it was before. So, troubles of this world, yeah, we're going to leave this stuff behind. But we got to have intent on where we're going, and know where we're going. And then down when we sing this song and when we think about it, it's all right. Because God has delivered us from these troubles on one hand, and then when we actually leave this place, we'll be better off anyhow. We're good. We're set. We're straight. We're all right. So leaving troubles. Trouble's part of life, I guess, and we don't like it. We try to get away from it, try to stay away from it. But when we are in troubles, when we do have those different difficulties we have, God is right there to deliver us. Amen. We got to know that God will deliver us. Amen. He's able to, and he will deliver us. It may not be to the point where we think it should have been this or should have been that, but as long as we know that it's God who's done it, then we're better off. Amen. And that's what leaving or exodus or escaping is all about. Being led by God. If we're led by God to leave something, guaranteed he'll be behind us as a rear guard to make sure that that trouble don't catch up with us. And that we don't go back to it. Because he's right there. We got to talk to him about it if we try to go back. We still got to see him. And so God is our protector. God is our deliverer. And in him, that's who we should trust. Amen. Door to church is open. Let us stand.